All right, well, we're recording already, so we've got Rob and Brian here. Hopefully, we can get Dan in. Brian's a 30-plus year, recently retired vet. Dan's currently in the Army, just pinned on his bird, so is well into his career too. And Brian just authored an article titled "Still in the Game: Being an Athlete at 55 Plus." So I wanted to kind of start it off with a pretty basic question of Brian, how do you define athlete in your personal and professional life? Is there anything, are there expectations or capabilities that you have tied to it? How do you think about being an athlete? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's evolved a little bit for me over the course of my life. I think I was listening to you guys talk about it the other day on a podcast. I think you mentioned the first time you walked into a gym, at 14, 15 years old. And it got me thinking that, I probably started thinking of myself as an athlete, probably around that age when I was playing high school sports and started working out like in a regimented way for the first time. But certainly as an Army, in the Army as an infantryman, Army officer, it was the core of what we did. I always, never for a second, did I not think that I was an athlete. I never really used the term military or tactical athlete until I heard Rob use it, back in the day when MTI, I think, was getting off the ground. Military athlete was something that I kind of grabbed onto. It's really been since I retired and, thinking about just sort of my own identity physically, and am I an athlete? I know that's a long way of getting to the answer, but the way I think about it, it's an identity. It's the core of who I am, and it's not just sort of a hobby or a thing that I do. I would argue that even though I'm not well, I don't know. We could talk about it, in terms of professional athlete. I don't think I'm a professional athlete, but it is. My life is centered around that, even at soon to be 58. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but just a little bit of context as I've thought about it over time.
How has it changed over time for you?
Well, I think it changed in terms of a purpose. I went to West Point, when I was 18, and so I went right from high school into the Army and then commissioned. And the purpose was always to be, physically fit, achieve certain physical standards at the academy. And then when I graduated, it was to be the tip of the spear, to lead by example. I think that's the thing that motivated me more than anything, to maintain my level of fitness. And then once I began to understand that, oh, by the way, it's not just about leading by example, but my life potentially literally depends on my fitness, I started to think about things in a very different way. It wasn't just about foot marching or lifting weights. It was also about, how I took care of myself and my body. So it evolved into something, I think, much bigger than just to achieve a specific sport end or meet a certain grade or standard on a fitness test or in the swimming pool or whatever I had to. And now I think it's even, I don't want to make it too complicated, but I think it's just about, it's become, and this is where I struggled, right? Do I need an objective or a goal? And when I retired, it was missing. And I felt that with certain events, but what I've come to realize is that I'm an athlete because of it's central to my life. I'm committed and dedicated to it, and it's part of my lifestyle. And I want to be clear here. I've never been the fastest, the strongest. No one was ever trying to achieve my 1 rep max on anything, ever. But it was always about just keep grinding and stay after it.
What about you, Rob? How do you, for you personally, outside of your career as a coach, how have you defined being an athlete personally in what you undertake?
Yeah, kind of interesting in my own thought about that. I really didn't even when I was coaching, or have been coaching relatively recently, probably almost 48 or 55, I finally start thinking of myself as an athlete. And it's been interesting after, listening to you're reading Brian's essay and thinking about it myself, I would say that in my definition, athlete doesn't really have to pertain to your performance, whatever that is outside. So you can be. I've never been a great. I've worked with great athletes, and great athletes are able to move their bodies in space like other people can't. They're just really good at that. And I've never been one of those people. I'm the F-150 of athletes, I guess, kind of like Brian. Uh, but I think there is some things to it. One is that your fitness training is aimed at improving some type of outside the gym performance. So there's some focus to it, and it's progressed, and it has an aim and a target. And if you're not doing that and you're just fitness training, you're just doing fitness, you're not. That's why we call it training, and that's why I call it training sessions. If what you're doing on the fitness side is not focused on something, then you're just exercising. And so that's one thing, is that your fitness training is focused towards some type of outside performance. The second part of it is that whatever that outside thing that you're doing isn't only fitness. So there's a skill or technique element to it too, and you're practicing that skill. So over the years, when I say training, I mean fitness training. And when I say practice, I mean technical practice for your skill or whatever you're doing. So for me, my focus right now for several years has been on backcountry hunting. So I shoot my bow, bow hunting. I shoot my bow every day. As I'm getting ready, all my training right now is aimed at improving, uphill movement and mountain movement. I'm working on, I'm going to go spring black bear hunting this year and do some other stuff to work on the woodsmanship elements of hunting. I'm looking at gear, all those types of things, all those things that are kind of that technical practice side of the outside performance. And then there's another element too, which is the idea of self that improves your performance, but not necessarily is fitness. So that's, your nutrition, paying attention to nutrition with the aim towards outside performance. Working on sleep hygiene. I'm not the best at that, but I do think about it. Other elements of wellness, we know, whether that be recovery or whatever, I think are all components of it. And just kind of thinking about it, and Brian kind of kicked this off, is that when you call yourself an athlete and you treat yourself like an athlete, and that's up to you. It's like an attitude perspective. You almost show respect to yourself, especially on the physical side. So you take care of yourself, and something's focused, and it's just a way to show some respect to yourself. You get to define it. You get to define your sport or the activity that you're doing, and it's a way to kind of, just kind of tighten things up and move through life with a little bit more intent and discipline.
Brian, I'm curious how fitness and being an athlete tied into your experience in various leadership roles within the Army, going from platoon formations and up throughout your career. How did that tie in to your day-to-day job outside of your own personal performance, more so as a leader of troops?
Yeah, so this is a good question because I was actually looking for this article, but I couldn't find it. But I recall someone wrote an article for MTI a few years back, a senior officer that was in a staff job, if you will, at the Pentagon or something like that, and wrote an article about, hey, can I still consider myself as a tactical athlete? I don't know if you recall that particular article.
Do you?
Yeah, so I was referencing or thinking a little bit about that, which ties to your question, Charlie. I mean, to be honest, I think it's pretty simpler when you're with troops, directly with troops, at the platoon level, company level, battalion level for sure, and then the brigade level, because you're expected to perform. Rob talked about training and skill, and I made a note here. I didn't really think about it until much later in my life when I was more mature, I think, as an officer. But physical training, it's called physical training for a reason, right? You're training for a reason. And, we used to tell our soldiers that, or I used to tell my soldiers that task conditions and standards, that might be the most important training event that you have at the day to achieve a certain objective, a certain standard, to grow a skill, which in an infantry formation is to, shoot, move, and communicate under a load. So I'm expected to do that as well. So there's that personal piece of it that, I've got to be able to be be physically in the right condition in order to command and lead troops in combat. It gets a little gray, I think, for some, and it was there for a bit for me when, my last, no shit troop assignment was being a brigade commander. When I was at West Point, even though I was the brigade tactical officer and oversaw the Corps of Cadets, I certainly wanted to be a good example physically, but the reality of life is nobody was asking me to put on a rucksack and body armor and grab my M4, and go to Afghanistan or Iraq. Although I did go to Afghanistan actually in 2019 with the Sajida, but that's kind of a separate piece. But that actually, it's not completely separate in the sense that it did cause me to reflect on the fact that you do always need to be ready, even if you're I won't say hanging out, even if you're stationed, you're assigned to positions at the Pentagon, the military academy, wherever. So I would say a couple things. One is you do have a requirement and an obligation to be ready. As I mentioned, I think I mentioned it in the article, and I've said this to Rob before, is that it can't be, hey, oh wait, I need a month to get myself good to go before I deploy. But the other piece of it is that you cannot promote a culture of fitness if you're not fit, period. So those are two sort of aspects to it all that really sort of tied into how I thought about it over the course of my career and various assignments.
Yeah, Brian, I had a question for you. With the, kind of when we got started, but especially with the acceleration of the idea of tactical fitness at the big Army, kind of came up through the soft units, but now with H2F assigned to brigades, that kind of stuff. Do you think that the idea that military members now are at least called military athletes has helped with the idea that they're training for something? Or has that, because I imagine when you first started, PT was just PT. Maybe there wasn't the connection between PT and performance.
Yeah, I don't think there was a connection, but I'm not sure that. I don't know how many people call themselves military athletes these days. I mean, I've been a little bit out of that conversation. All I can speak to is in terms of my own units and the people that I serve with. I think that was a significant change for us when we start to think about ourselves as athletes with an intended purpose and end state. And it was a mindset shift. I also think, just to be quite frank, that 9/11 changed a lot of this too, in terms of the recognition that, you've got to be at the top of your game to be able to fight and win and to operate in the conditions that you got to operate. The early 90s, when I came into the Army, aside from Ranger School, I mean, PT, my first assignment was a mech formation in Germany, which was a great place to be. But, LSD was the fitness event of choice. LSD being long, slow distance. I mean, then you just started running, right? I mean, for what? I look back on that. It's funny as hell to think of, and we all did it, but it wasn't training, man. It was just running a long distance real slow. I don't know if I answered your question directly, Rob.
Dan, I'd like to get tied into this. So we were asking Brian about how being an athlete and your own personal fitness, how it tied in to your role as a leader within the Army, how it may have influenced any decisions, how it may have changed how you led troops. How is that tied into your career so far, 20 plus years in?
Yeah. First, are you guys able to hear me okay? I had to switch to the app on the phone.
Loud and clear.
Okay, good. The first comment I've had for how it tied into the military athlete as it applied to leadership was, I'd like to build off of what Brian's last point was. I too was born in the long, slow distance type of running, and then as I entered battalion command, I'm looking at all these young lieutenants and captains who are much more, I'd say, functionally fit. They were much stronger in strength, or I should say they had greater scores in strength and work capacity. So they could beat me in some of those events. I was able to I would say use some of that old school long, slow runs for endurance, which we actually lacked, whether it was under a load for a rucksack or just long duration runs, to still kind of set the physical example and then hang with them adequately. Because in the light infantry world, you are constantly being judged by your level of fitness in comparison to your peers. It's one of the beauties of it that makes it competitive. So in summary, I still used the skills that I think I'd developed over the years, which aren't as optimal anymore, depending on the situation, that longer, slow endurance in comparison to the young bucks that were able to sling more weight around the containers or out there on the grassy fields, if that gets to what you were asking.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, I'm kind of curious how this question has played into your coaching career in terms of being an athlete and the fitness requirements associated with that. Do you think it's important for a coach to be an athlete in some form or variety, or is it not necessarily needed?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I always understood with the athletes that I worked with, especially on the mountainside, and I can't tell you how many lectures I had with young free skiers or mountain athletes about the change in attitude they needed to take towards their fitness, towards their skill development, and just towards their nutrition and other stuff. And so I always understood intuitively what that was. Many of the coaches, many of the people get into coaching, especially on the sports performance side. So that's coming up through, the exercise science programs at universities, working in college weight rooms. A lot of those athletes, or those coaches don't make it on the athletic side. So they're a great high school athlete. They don't make it at college, or they get out of college and they're able to do that, but they can't go on the next level. And so they get into coaching, and so they kind of think of themselves like that. Uh, is it paramount from a coaching perspective on strength conditioning? No. The primary currency of everything that I do as strength conditioning coach is the programming. So I need to make sure the programming works for the athletes and have that focus. That's my craft, and that's what I do. Do I need to personally, think of myself as an athlete to do that? No, I don't. I don't think that's super important. Does it matter if the coach is fit for his athletes? It depends on how good of a coach you are. There are some incredible strength conditioning coaches who don't look like they can lift or, or anything like that. Just like they're great, football coaches or other types of coaches. So no, I don't think it's super paramount that you are consider yourself an athlete, but I do think it's important that you understand what it is so you can give that to the athletes that you are coaching. So that's my answer, I guess.
So, kind of going back to the "Am I an athlete?" question and the motivators behind that, Brian, do you think as you've transitioned out of the army that your training necessarily needs to be tied to a goal or an event or a challenge? Or is it something that's perhaps more intrinsically internally based?
Yeah, what's funny, Charlie, is you literally read my mind because it was something I wanted to talk about. Because Rob mentioned it briefly, or at least I thought he did something to this effect. Yeah, so that was my struggle, and that's what I sort of touched on a little bit. I mean, when I retired, just to continue to do PT was the thing I did, right? I mean, it was just part of who I was, and I'm not sure, just the way I'm wired, that I could ever not maintain a level of health and fitness, in some degree. But I felt, and maybe this is part of a larger question, right? But I felt myself sort of struggling a little bit in terms of just a general identity, when you retire after such a long career. And it's something I didn't think I would. But what I came to realize is that, yeah, hey, I'm training. I'll say training to maintain a certain goal and competing against myself to stay fit, to stay healthy. But for me, I personally needed something else. And, I've sort of dove into this mountain world at the end of my career. I mean, I never thought about the things that I'm doing now while I was in the army, for the simple fact that, I had a whole, formation and a whole series of things that I could do physically that I was responsible for. So I think the answer for me, and I can only speak for myself, is that is it enough intrinsically? It is, but for me, to always have something else is really important. This weekend I just put my roadmap together. I've mentioned this to Rob. For my 60th birthday, I want to go back to Denali, so in 2 years, and that's something that I want to complete because we didn't summit last time. So I put my roadmap together, my training, my big ticket items to build forward on that, obviously using MTI's programming, but the major events that I want to get back to Denali in May of 7. So I get, and then after that, I'll worry about something else. But having that is really important to me. So I can only speak for myself that, that extrinsic goal is a motivator for sure.
Dan, in your situation, still as a active duty officer, but I think fair to say probably in the latter half of your career, you're still balancing the requirements of being a full-time tactical military athlete. Is this something you think about? Say, hey, my retirement or transition is a few years or a decade down the road. Is that something you're thinking about, and how things that you want to accomplish to maintain that status as an athlete in your own head?
Yes, and it scares the hell out of me, frankly. But it's one of the luxuries of the Army, right? Is that we always have another objective, whether that's a deployment, and it's why the MTI programming matches so well with it. You have an objective, whether it's a deployment, a potential deployment, and it can even just be keeping up with your formation. So you've always got something that you're physically driving to, especially in the combat arms units. But I think the biggest benefit of what's come from that mindset is similar to what Brian said, is that we know that we are going to need to have objectives to continue to do so. There's basic fitness that we could do to just stay fit, but to maintain a military athlete or a retired military athlete mindset, you're going to continue to find those objectives that you'll strive for.
Anything that you have your eye on personally?
No, mine is geographically based right now, and it's twofold. Number one, even though I won't be in a direct role with younger cadets in my next assignment, they're still just leading by example, so I want to be able to do that. But going back to the geographical point, up in the Hudson Valley area, White Mountains further north, it's something I've always wanted to explore with a pack on my back for multiple days. And so that's the non-military goal, but still staying military oriented with my fitness.
Rob, what about you?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to ask you, I'm curious how your motivations have potentially changed. You've been backcountry hunting for several years now, other sports, anything that keeps you going personally? Or have you found that it's just such a habit formed intrinsic motivator?
No, yeah, fitness has always been. I guess going back to the strength coach question, I do think that to be a good strength coach, you got to love to train. So that's one thing for sure. But fitness has always been part of my life since I was 11, 12 years old. But I get this question a lot, or I get athletes 40 years plus. They're kind of getting into fitness, and they set up kind of artificial events is what I call them. So they'll do like a Go Ruck event or a Spartan race, and they'll say, what do you think about this? They'll have 6 Spartan races where they got to travel all over the country. I tell them, why don't you set that stuff aside and come spend 2 weeks backpacking the Highline Trail in the Wind River Range. And the reason because it's the artificial events. There's no real skill development, right? You can train for them on the fitness side, but you're not going to learn what it's like to weather a lightning storm in the mountains, or how to pack. There's no skills. So I like the idea of that skill development element of the athleticism, and just like Brian's talking about, the skill development of alpinism. You're learning your clothing systems, learning how to move over glaciers, learning how to keep pace, and on Denali, just shove out the friggin' tent every night, right? All that kind of stuff, and suffer with the cold. There's some skill development, and it's interesting. Dan, now because he's sending some hunting photos. I know he likes hunting, and there's all types of wordsmanship stuff when it comes to hunting. Especially, I've never hunted whitetails, but I mean, there's a whole art to it. And there's guys up there I've read about who they go in the winter and they find big buck. They're up there in upstate New York. They find big buck tracks in the snow and they track them down and shoot them. Right, that's a whole nother level of hunting. I was really never passionate about hunting until I started bow hunting, and it's so much more interesting than rifle hunting because there's so much more involved. And it's all these interesting skills that kind of come with the sport. For me personally, I spend, my winters, in warm place in Hawaii now. And I've gotten into this sport called downwind foiling. And I'm going to be going to Hood River and trying that. And it takes a lot of athleticism. And I'm not that guy. It's taken me so long to try to figure it out. But gosh, I don't need to get geeky with you, but just to learn to stand on the board and then how to paddle up in flat water and then how to run the foil. There's all these interesting things. So that's another element. It's kind of another element of an activity that I kind of put my fitness towards, and I train for that. I do interval paddle ups and stuff like that. And moving forward, yeah, there are some things I think I want to do. Like on the hunting side, I'd really like to go up to Alaska and do a DIY caribou hunt with a bow, maybe supported through a pack raft or something. I got a buddy up there now, and he's at one of the bases up there, and he's done it for moose, with a pack raft. That just sounds really interesting to me. Unlike Brian, I'm not so much into hiking a big snowy mountain anymore. But I would like to go back to the Wind River Range. I have some young kids now, and what has changed me over the years, I used to just treat the mountains as a gym. There's always some workout. I've done the Highline Trail in 2 days, 30 miles a day. Man, and we were kicking ourselves for not bringing our fishing poles and slowing down and learning that. And I took up this sport a little bit ago called, it's just fly fishing with this a rod, and it's been interesting learning, the details of catching cutthroat, even this river right by my house here, and how to twitch that and all the intricate details. So I do like this idea of athleticism, not only in terms of the fitness side, but the skill development. And I remember I had a Sandhurst team. I think they were at West Point or someplace, and they wanted me to help them with their scores. They didn't do as well as they did at the event, and I took a look at all their scores, and I'm a fitness guy. Their fitness was out of the park, and where they lost the most points was, their marksmanship. And sometimes, guys like me, kind of grinders like Brian, we can get caught up in just grinding through the fitness. Where what we really need to do is work on the technique. And it's the technique as I've gotten older that has really fascinated me and made me, really it gained some interest. It's enriched my life, the technique of the sports that I pursue, I guess.
Can I just quick comment on that? I mean, and maybe this is we're talking to older guys here, that appreciate the nuance and the beauty of what Rob just explained. I mean, I was like fired up as he was talking. I'm totally getting on that caribou and moose hunt. But I do want to say though, I went back up. I spent 6 years of my career up in Alaska. Rob and I have talked about this before. I took my son up there to do some moose hunting with friends of mine a couple of years ago. And I think what I had taken for granted a little bit, because when I went moose hunting, when I was up there, I was with people that just loved the sport, right? And it was ingrained in who they were, was watching my son, who was a senior in high school, just really begin to develop these skills and this excitement for it. So I think what you just described, I think maybe as I was starting to think about an athlete, I was thinking about sort of these physical endurance events that are tied to mountain climbing and some other types of things. But, just to be able to go do what you just explained on a float, a caribou hunt, I mean, that's no effing joke. And there's a skill and an endurance and a fitness level that's got to be off the charts to be able to do it. But if at the end of the day, if you can't pull the bow back and, hit what you're aiming at or shoot your 30-06, all that good fitness is for nothing. So you got to have the skill.
Yeah. I've learned that the hard way.
Brian, I wanted to pull in a quote from the article that's kind of stood out to me a little bit. So in the third section, you've got a bullet point on the centrality of sport. It says, my involvement in physical training, hiking, climbing, or sport in general is central to my life. It's not just a hobby, but a core part of who I am. And it's tied to my values of discipline, resilience, perseverance, and integrity. Could you tie the values of discipline, resilience, perseverance, and integrity? Could you explain how those tie into your perception of being an athlete?
Yeah, I think, I'll start with the integrity piece, which for me is, you've got to be able to sort of walk the talk. I mean, you can't say that you're an athlete or that it's important to you, but you're not putting in the work. And so then, circle it back to the first value there of discipline. You got to have the discipline to put in the work. I was actually thinking about that this morning, because I was just dragging my ass out of bed. The only person that would know that I didn't, do my sandbag tosses and I think session 18 or whatever it is, the limited equipment, is me. Nobody else would know that. So, there's that element of discipline and integrity right there. For the other two, the pieces of resilience and perseverance. I mean, I think perseverance ties into that. Just, persevering through the tough times and the hard times, pushing through the wall or the proverbial wall. I don't know if you guys have ever read the book, The All Blacks, about the New Zealand rugby team. I'm going to butcher the quote, but, it's the lonely mile. It's no one else. No one knows that you're pushing yourself on that mile other than yourself. So, that element of perseverance, and then resilience, being able to push through the tough times, being resilient enough to push out another set, or if it's too cold, to push through the cold and the climate and that kind of thing. So all those values tie into what I believe allow me to consider myself an athlete, but I also think they're part of my life. They're part of the core of who I am. And I don't want this to come across like, some, I don't know. I don't want this to come across in a douchebag kind of way, which is my biggest fear of all this. It's just, you just got to keep getting after it. And I don't know. It's just, I'll just stop there before I say something I probably shouldn't.
I think that's so interesting. I spend winters in Hawaii, and after I sold my first business, I spent a week there, and I got up every morning and I would go run in the morning. And there were these old guys, 70-year-old, happiest old guys I'd ever seen. In these old little Toyota trucks, surfing every morning. And where I do my foiling in Hawaii, and I'm 57 almost. I am the youngest person out there.
Yeah.
There are women and men out there.
Yeah.
70 plus, paddleboarding or downwind foiling or surfing. And it's really it's kind of interesting, I guess, for all you young guys out there. But I intend to be hunting until I'm 75. And it's been interesting just recently as I've started to do more endurance and some of the polar training stuff that I'm developing. It's pretty interesting, just all that training I have that I can, I don't take scheduled rest days. I just go until I feel like I don't. I'm just trying to see how far it is. It's not like I'm pushing it because I'm tough or anything. I'm just interested. And my body I think that for those of us who have been, in the game, my training age, I've got a training age that's 40 years long. I started doing this when I was 14. I got a lot of training age, and all that stuff adds up, and that gives you, I think, some physical capacity that you don't realize until you get to my age. And I'm going 8-9 days now before I take a day off, and so it's just really I guess it's really enlightening, and it's surprising in a great way that you can, you got to fight through your joint issues mostly, and your performance decline. You got to be good with that. Sorry, Dan, but you're going to get slower.
Yeah.
But the one thing about it is I remember there's this guy who I grew up in a town, and he ended up being like a world-class marathoner at an older age. And he said, I don't really get any faster. I just haven't gotten that much slower, and other people just have been dropping off. So there's few of us out there. And it's kind of interesting, yeah, that, I'm for my age, I'm probably, super fit, but it's not like I'm any more fit than I was 10 years ago. I just kept doing it. So
Dan, I want to start off with you on this question. Can you describe how your training has evolved over, let's just go with your entire training time, right? That could go back to high school as an athlete or whatever the case may be. Break it down in whatever sequence makes sense to you. That could be by decade or by, bill it within your career, however that works. But how has it changed? How has it evolved over the last 30 plus years for you?
Sure. Yeah, I will start by saying, slightly embarrassingly, I wasn't much of a high school athlete. And so I kind of found the weight room for the first time through ROTC in college, once I found the Army as a goal. But I made the mistake of, again, going back to an earlier comment, like, we thought running was all you needed to do for your legs. So I never really focused on leg strength in the gym. And that carried me through, I'd say, Ranger School, right after my basic course, and then the first deployment. But I vividly remember, and this is harkening back to one of the things I think I heard Rob say about Greg Glassman a while back. Glassman was the first introduction around like '05 in CrossFit to what was called functional fitness at the time, and became super attracted to that as a young captain. And it wasn't that I was doing less running, but it was just something far different, far more competitive and enjoyable. And then I remember the introduction of Ranger Athlete Warrior, which I think is where I first got into MTIs as part of that. I was, again, captain, trainer of infantry platoons. And then it really started to be that objective mindset with a program. So in other words, what are you training for? And I stopped thinking of it as fitness and thought of it more as training with a goal oriented. And that's kind of stayed throughout my time, with always having to have something to go for. I've definitely had periods of where I'm just doing fitness because it's either out of what we were saying, it's out of habit, it's out of, we feel like shit if we don't work out, so I'm going to do it. I mean, just recently, to fast forward all the way to this, I was in an academic program for war college stuff, and I super busy in the library or on the computer. So I was doing heavy cardio just to clear my mind, less strength, just because I was actually working out to stay mentally more healthy to get all the academic requirements done here. But I did have to add, it made me think of one last thing, not totally related, but wanted to just make sure we added in as it relates to a military athlete. It's kind of neat here in an academic environment. We take a lot of critiques when we're selecting the next class because we ask for what we call now your ACFT score, your PT score. And you'll have people go, what is it? What does a PT card matter if you're just you're producing planners and problem solvers? And the number one response that shuts everybody up is, well, that's your indicator of discipline. If you're a mid to senior officer and you have a terrible PT score, it's your fault. You're not doing it, and so it indicates that you lack discipline to accomplish other things. And so it's a criteria to get into this. It's one of the things I like about it is they still hold fitness at this level as an important factor for a multitude of reasons.
That is one element of being an athlete rather than just exercising. Is if you just exercise, you end up doing what you're good at or what you like to do.
That's right.
Right. And that's how come I don't like big boy rules for fitness or marksmanship. Right. But if you're an athlete and you're training for something, believe me, unlike Dan, I am not the endurance guy. I'd much rather be doing, curls and back squats, but now I got to go out there and I got to do that endurance. I've really come as I've gotten older to really like that endurance stuff, maybe because it's different for me or whatever. But, yeah, but that's one thing. If you're training for an objective and you're an athlete that's training for an objective, you're going to end up doing stuff that you don't want to do, you're not good at. And that's just part of that discipline element that Brian and Dan have talked about.
Rob, how's it evolved for you over time? I'm curious. We've written about this before between us two, but how has your training approach, what you're using, evolved? And I think including physical limitations as it relates to age is important to tag in.
Yeah, just the joint pain just from arthritis has really limited some of the stuff that I can do. They used to do for sure. Doing bench press and back squats now really exercise mostly in pain management. I just got to suffer through the first 3 rounds and then it never really stops. Or even long running. So, but I have found that as I've gotten older, I like doing the endurance stuff more. I don't like spending as much time in the gym, and the super. I don't mind lifting heavy anymore, but I don't. I want to keep my gym sessions relatively short. 25 to 30 minutes. So that has been a shift for me for sure. But it also works well with my my outdoor pursuits, the athletic pursuits I'm going towards. It's legs and lungs kill the big bulls. For elk hunting, it's not It's not your big bench press, thank God, because my bench press is brown pretty much. My right shoulder just kills me where I bench press. But yeah, so you're definitely you can't outrun age, right? And it's generally the joint stuff that slows us down the most. It's not really the muscles, it's the joints that just kind of limits kind of what you can do. But you just got to lace them up, right, Brian? You just got to lace them up
Yeah.
and get out there and keep going.
Yeah, I was just going to say, +1 to all that. I was thinking again about that this morning. I think you're inside my head, Rob, because I was like, man, I'm glad this is just like a 35, 40-minute training session today, because I that's about my limit. I could go. I love being outside, right? Hiking, that kind of stuff. But just sort of grinding in the gym. Yeah, those days of like 90-minute sessions are long gone. And I got to be honest with you, if you guys write like a 90-minute session for an old guy, I ain't doing it.
Yeah, no, I can do the I know we have like our grinds like I did with my son the other day is like 40 minutes of like a sandbag stuff, and then like you
Yeah,
run with the sandbag. I can do that about 40 minutes, or maybe I can
I'm
push
with
that
you.
to an hour. But God, I used to love going to the gym and just lifting for 90 minutes. Yeah, oh yeah. It was
Yeah, can't
my
do that.
20s. I loved it, but I can't do that anymore. It's just I don't know if my joints would take it, but yeah, I'm just not like you. I'd much rather be outside.
Yeah, for sure.
It is kind of interesting that the pathways seem to be a combination of what your physical limitations are in relation to aging, plus the discovery of new training methodologies. Kind of going back what to Dan was speaking on. You've got the what was the old way of we're going to run all day and all night, to the introduction of CrossFit, and then companies like Mountain Tactical that kind of took it to the next level in terms of integrating tried and true strength and conditioning principles that have been in use with professional sports for some time, but not necessarily within the military mountain spheres. And it seems like that's the narrative that I hear most frequently, particularly from military guys, as opposed to, you would think maybe we're just not that smart. You would think there would be a realization of, oh, this long slow running stuff isn't a good match for military athletes. It has to be externally applied, right? You discovered CrossFit, or you discovered military athlete, whatever the case may be, as opposed to a good internal holistic look at what we're doing and seeking ways to improve it. But I guess that's why you have specialists, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing on the military side. Ranger School is an endurance event, so is SFAS. I get lots of guys who do those programs. I want to do some more heavy deadlifting. I'm like, it's those are endurance events, and a lot of military. I mean, you don't know as from a military perspective what the deployment's going to take you to. So there are lots of guys who are doing CrossFit, went downrange to Afghanistan and getting their asses kicked doing mountain patrols because they didn't have that type of mountain endurance. That's how come they kind of found us. So there's definitely an endurance element to the military, I guess, fitness demands. What is so interesting from a programming perspective is you can't train long, slow distance in the typical endurance coach training for an ultra methodology because they just don't have the training time to put in all that volume to develop, their zone 2 aerobic base. It's something that I'm working through right now. So there's definitely an endurance side to it, but it's not all endurance, like you said. I think what was missed before is just the loading, the strength element to it, the work capacity stuff, and that's some of the things that CrossFit and Glassman exposed early on.
Can I ask a quick military athlete question? I think quick, kind of directed to Brian.
Please.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to drive on with it. So this made me think of, for background, I was an infantry background, and it's both light infantry and mechanized infantry, but it was most recently light. It's also where I started, was light. But I had an old ops sergeant major when we were on Bradleys and tanks, and we were super frustrated with the level of fitness within the entire organization. And it's kind of cliche, but you have your your tankers or your Bradley guys aren't as fit as your light infantrymen. And I know Brian was a striker background, so I was kind of looking at this one. So the ops sergeant major says, the problem is in the military mechanized community, it is not the soldier that takes the weapon to the fight. In other words, that Bradley or tank has to be fully maintained. So that is where their priority lies. Whereas the light infantry, it's the soldier taking the rifle to the fight. So their body has to be fit enough, has to be strong enough to take that weapon to the fight. And it's always kind of stuck in my head is how much of a problem that may be for some of the military athlete mindset is if it's not you physically required to get the weapon into the fight to close with the enemy, it's that equipment. You're going to spend more time in the motor pool. You're going to spend more time in the motor pool because you don't want to get yelled at. Your equipment has to be good. But if it's your body that's taking you there, you're going to spend more time focused on actual quality fitness. And so, Brian, again, striker commander background. So I don't know if you would agree with that statement or if you think I'm off base there.
No, it sounds to me like sometimes when I hear that and have heard that from folks, it's sort of a statement from somebody that doesn't want to do any PT, but all the different formations, I would argue, I'll just put it this way. I would argue, and I've made this argument, with the striker formation, it was never really a major issue because of how we were designed and what our mission was. It was sort of that blend of, mobility, firepower, and light infantry because we were not vehicle based. It was about the people. Whereas mechanized formations, I think the vehicle was in some ways the center of kind of what we were doing, which I think became a problem, to be honest with you. I would just say this, and Rob, I think you and I may have chatted about this before. I believe that there is a direct correlation between physical training and physical toughness and mental toughness. At the end of the day, you're still going to need to be mentally tough, whether you're driving a tank, through, Fallujah or, you're humping a rucksack through Kirkuk. And I think that mental toughness is still built through physical toughness. So I think that correlation matters. So anyway, I don't necessarily buy into that, or I didn't buy into that. But I do think the tie between the two is super important, and that there is now this is totally anecdotal, right? I've not done zero research on this, but just a thought.
Yeah.
I've got one more question that I wanted to plug in. Rob, go ahead. Get yours in.
Yeah, I just like to add, maybe totally off topic from that. One of the things about getting older is I've had to find, because pretty soon there might be some day where my knees aren't going to allow me to move in the mountains on foot as much anymore. And so it's kind of interesting that now, I'm looking at doing this summer a bikepacking trip on my mountain bike, and probably be mostly bike and hike. But there are some kind of interesting things as you get older where you can kind of shift the vehicle, I guess. You don't have to. The good thing about a mountain bike is you don't have to hike downhill, right? You can ride it downhill, which is the worst when you have bad knees. I don't mind going uphill. So there's just some things I think that if you want to stay in the game as a person who's getting older, there are plenty of options. You just got to be a little creative.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to go into as a last question was, as I'm surrounded here as the elder statesman, as the youngest guy in this group right now. So, but I've got my own, physical limitations due to injuries and whatnot. As you are looking down the road, 10, 15 years, how do you see yourself aging gracefully as an athlete? Brian, I'll start with you.
I'm not a very graceful guy, so there's going to be nothing graceful about whatever I'm going to do. I think, to that last point Rob made is, as I have gotten older, I do know my body better. I'm still a little hard-headed that I think I could push through something, but, I think it's taken on new adventures and new experiences, whether it's, mountain biking, swimming, surfing, those types of things that allow me to stay in the game, which is hence the title of the article. I mean, because that's how I thought about it. How do I stay in the game? And it may not be, back country hunting or whatever, but I think that's how I think about it going forward, is let my body talk to me in a way that lends itself to these other activities, these other training.
How about you, Dan?
Yeah, I too am not doing anything gracefully. And I did say I'm one of the younger ones on this one. I'm not the youngest, but for me, it is purely about competition with my son that I foresee taking me down. It really, he's 20 years old now. He was a baseball, soccer kid, but he's really fine in the gym. And God willing, he's got plans to be a fireman once he gets done with school. it's been a goal probably for the past 2 years to always be able to whoop his ass in any physical event. And I'm going to continue to do that until I'm 6 feet under.
How about you, Rob?
Yeah, I can't remember who said this, maybe John Irving or something, but they said, when I grow up, I want to be a little boy. And that's the thing about, some of these sports that I do, this backcountry hunting. I mean, you get dressed up in camo. These guys do it all the time, right? You get dressed up in camo, run around the woods, chase stuff. And, this downwind foiling, the pinnacle of that is to be able to go between Hawaiian islands. The trip I want to do up in Alaska, I'm going to be doing that. I'm going to try maybe go up there, and I've gone up there and hunted black-tailed deer before. I might try to do that again this year. This is stuff, it's just like adventure, right? It's just an outdoor adventure, and it's just like being a little boy. So, I think I'm going to keep, looking for those types of things. It could be that, as I get in my 70s, I'll try to sail around the world, on a sailboat or something by myself, just something that's kind of like that, where it's less physical and more skill development. But on the physical side, one of the things that I'm working on doing is, kind of built like a fire hydrant. The lighter I can get, the better it's going to be on my knees and joints. Might be no lifting and all running as I get older, and no protein, and to just cut some body weight. Physically, that's some things I'm looking at, is try to get lighter, because there'll be less impact on my joints. I'll be able to move better.
Great. Any other notes, guys? Any other comments you wanted that tag in? All right, well, then we'll wrap it up there. Brian, Dan, thanks so much for joining. Thanks for
Thank you,
the
gentlemen.
article
Thank
as
you.
well, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right.